participant lists and the rest.
Okay.
Okay, I suppose we can start.
Okay.
Okay, so welcome everyone to the Acme meeting at IETF 110. Nice slide. So welcome to not Prague. This is the note well. This is something that Rich and I came up with just the other day. Not really. I'm sure by now you've seen all this many, many times, and now you've seen it yet another time. Okay, so our agenda for today, we start with the regular administrivia. We've seen the note well. We need a note taker, and well, we don't really need a Jabber scribe. I'm monitoring the Jabber on my phone. So, yeah, joy of using multiple devices. And but we do need a note taker. So please volunteer now. You can't proceed without a note taker, so please volunteer either on Jabber or just break into the conversation and speak up.
I'll do it if nobody else will.
Okay.
Rich, I'll take notes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Okay, and I'd like to remind everybody when you talk, please identify yourselves as if we were in a physical meeting, because later when you watch the session on YouTube, you don't really know who's talking. Okay, so we got a note taker. We'll have the document update. We'll talk about Acme integrations and the DTN node and next steps. So before we get to the document updates, a little public service announcement. Rich has decided to step down as co-chair of Acme. We're also looking for a volunteer to replace Rich. You can contact me or the ADs, but not right now. Let's do this after the meeting. Okay, so let's go with the document updates. So the email last mime is already in the RFC pipeline. Star delegation is in IETF last call. Acme authority token is waiting for IS2 review. Authority token TN auth list just submitted an update, waiting for AD review. And we've got presentations here for DTN node ID, integrations, and subdomains. Regarding IETF Acme client, no recent update or discussions. So next slide. DTN node, the C presentation. Okay, let's see the presentation. All right, Brian, you're up.
Yes, thank you. So some of this content is duplicated but left in for background. So you can go on to the next slide. For those not familiar with DTN, it is a store and forward kind of a protocol similar to MIME and the way that the email systems work. And so the workflow of this validation method is really taken almost exactly as the same as the SMIME validation. Next slide, please. And the point of why this draft is being proposed, we talked about this on the last IETF, but the idea here is that Acme has all of the infrastructure and bookkeeping and all of the necessary things to do PKIX validation. And there's a need in the DTN to be able to do this kind of thing when a new node comes onto the network and needs to be validated the same way that a new email user might for an SMIME certificate. And next slide, please. So the flow that is in the email SMIME draft is basically duplicated here with this other encoding, this other transport. We're going to define an administrative record for the bundle protocol, and then the Acme server generates a part 1, a part 2, transport those through different paths, and then the DTN client that's doing the validating of their identifier combines them and sends back the response. Next slide, please. So because of the blackout period for the internet draft updates, I wasn't able to update the draft until just early this week, but I did submit a 0.1 version of the draft that had some clarification and updates. This is an experimental draft. The idea is that this would not be widely implemented in Acme, but it is a way to use the Acme mechanism to do what we need to do for DTN ID validation. And I believe this is the last slide, right?
Yes.
So at this point now, the last changes to the draft were to clarify some encodings, some data encodings, to use native byte strings instead of base 64 just for slight efficiencies. But the structure is really the same, and a lot of some supporting text was taken in from the changes to the SMIME draft. So this is more in alignment with what was approved for SMIME. And at this point, I have spent a little bit of time on a demonstration implementation, just as a proof of concept. And that's where things stand right now.
Okay, so this already is a working group draft. What are you looking for? Do you think that's ready for last call?
Because of the simplicity and because the alignment with the SMIME, I don't believe that there are any further changes necessary. Yes. So, oh, and the other thing to mention is that the bundle protocol drafts on which this were relying on for encoding and for transport, those have been moved to the editor queue. So those are now stabilized, whereas in the past they really were still in slight flux. So there should be no need for further changes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, the thing I'm worried about is if I now do the one of these audience polls, the show of hands, and ask how many people have read either version of the draft. Do you think we're going to get more than 5?
I doubt that.
Right. So we could do the working group last call, hopefully get some replies about it. So that's a different way. Anyone opposed to us having a working group last call? I think I saw Roman there for a moment. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, I was just going to jump in. As Brian has kind of indicated, this is a bit of a very narrowly focused kind of use case. We did decide to adopt it. So an approach we could try is to go to working group last call, and if we get enough folks to have put eyes on it, we work the results, we can proceed. If we don't get enough review, then we can have another conversation about how we can get more review here.
Okay.
Brian, has the DTN community looked at this?
Brian, I'm guessing this is a question for you.
Oh,
there has been some looking at this from the DTN side. The two things that are new here, the one that's stated here is that this does create a new claim type for URIs. So just making sure that the text in here for URI claims, URI identifiers is reasonable and complete. That's one of the, I think, focus areas. And if anybody has implementation experience or feedback from the SMIME draft, because this is the same, effectively the same workflow as the SMIME draft, anybody who's familiar with the SMIME draft should be able to at least understand the workflow here and be able to give feedback.
Okay, so I guess we have a plan for how to proceed. Any objections to this plan of just going to working group last call and hopefully getting enough reviews to matter? Going once, going twice. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. So thank you, Brian. And next presentation is Acme integrations. Right. Owen, okay.
We can go on to the next slide. It's an informational draft that describes how Acme can be integrated with multiple existing clients and devise certain enrollment mechanisms without requiring any changes. So what's documented in this version of the draft is EST, Brisky and Brisky Cloud, and TEEP integrations. And it doesn't change any of the specifications for EST, Brisky, or TEEP. It just stitches them together. Next slide. So there's been one change since the previous draft in IETF 109, and there was one open item, which is how do we handle the Brisky requirement that the Brisky identity cert, the Brisky registrar itself has an identity cert with an IDKP CMC RA EKU set. And the conclusion that we've reached is that even if the Brisky RA is in the middle, acting as essentially a proxy that lets a pledge get a certificate from Acme, the Brisky RA itself cannot get a certificate from an Acme server that is not willing to give it an IDKP CMC RA. So for example, Let's Encrypt is not going to issue an identity cert with IDKP CMC RA set. So if the RA, even though the RA may be getting Acme certificates on behalf of pledges, the RA itself may not be able to get an Acme certificate for itself if the Acme server it's integrating with is not willing to issue the RA an IDKP CMC RA EKU. And which just means that the Brisky registrar itself may have to get one identity, for example, CA. The change that's been clarified on multiple mailers, and that has been explicitly documented in draft 04. And that's it. Next steps. Right. Next slide, please. And this is just discussion. We were looking for reviewers and feedback, and we believe that we've no changes to make on this, and it's ready for last call. But we would like some reviewers, please.
Owen, I have a question. On the ID KP CMCRA, that's an
Yeah.
extended key usage OID, correct?
Correct, yes.
Do certificates have multiple end EKUs in them in general for Brisky?
Do they have multiple EK? Well, the cert could have multiple different bits set for extended key usage, but the one that's important for Brisky is the Brisky massa checks for that bit in the cert it sees from the Brisky array.
Gotcha. But
yeah.
So no, my question was, for example, in I'm drawing a blank on what it's called. You know, the secure IP stuff. There's multiple EKUs defined, but the RFC says you can't fail to validate if they're not there. This is different from that, and you're requiring one, and the users could have other EKUs in there which are unaffected. Is that true?
The users,
the relying parties, the consumers of the certs.
they could have other EKUs in there, yes.
Okay, thanks.
But the one that was contentious is this one, because
Yep.
the draft is all about Acme integrations. We know that Let's Encrypt isn't going to hand that out. So there's just that caveat that the Brisky array itself needs a search from a different C8 than the pledges.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Russ.
So it's my understanding that that particular EKU will only ever be used with CMP if you're an RA. So it's really hard to see how it would affect Acme.
Well, it's for the Brisky integration use case, Russ. So when you're using, so the Brisky array, the pledge talks to Brisky array, and actually I don't have a picture of the architecture in this presentation, but the pledge will talk to the Brisky array, and the Brisky array will have two backend integrations, one to the Massa server, one to Acme, and the RA will go to the Massa first to get a voucher and issue a voucher to the pledge, and it's for that interaction that the Massa will check that the Brisky RA's end entity cert has that bit set. And then it's a completely independent interaction between the RA and Acme to get a cert on behalf of the pledge, and that bit doesn't play any role in that interaction. So that EKU bit is only needed for the RA to get a voucher from the Massa server. That bit isn't set when the RA is getting a certificate from Acme to hand back to the pledge. So
okay, that's all consistent with what I know.
Okay. Okay, and we're explicitly calling out in the document that the RA itself can't get its own identity cert itself from Acme, because then the RA isn't going to be able to present that identity cert to the Massa in order to get a voucher on behalf of the pledge.
Okay, Hendrik.
So this is Henrik. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I understand this extended key usage as the indication that this is an array, and this is required by EST in the 7030 draft. It was initially introduced by CMC, and we also tend to reuse it also for CMP. So to have one, let's say, unique extended key usage identification for an array. And therefore, you're probably right. An Acme server will not issue or enroll a certificate with this key usage. And I feel like it's a good idea not to do that completely automatical, just based on a domain validation, because it's a specific role this entity has, the RA role, and this is indicated by this extended key usage. So
Okay.
I think it's okay.
Okay, good.
Yes, Deb?
I have to say aloud twice. What? So you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
So the Brewski end of things is all CMP based, not CMC based?
The Brewski side of things is just getting the signed voucher, which whatever the JSON voucher format. I can't recall the RFC off my head. But the Brewski flow where the RA is interacting with the master server is just to get the signed vouchers to hand back to the pledge, so that the pledge trusts the RA.
Right,
And
but
then
Russ's comment was that you need that for CMP. Can we let Russ talk?
Yeah, Russ can talk.
So Brewski's EST based, and that particular key usage is needed if you're going to be an RA, and all I think they're saying is that you can't use Acme to get an RA certificate, and that seems fine.
Yeah. I got that part. Right, and that makes complete sense, and I am in complete agreement that you don't want Acme issuing RA certs because that would be bad, very bad. My question is, do you need the extension, the EKU, for CMP or CMC? They're doing EST, which can be both, right?
So it's needed for CMC. It is being added to CMP in lamps right now, and I think EST uses it, but sorry, my memory's not that good.
I think so EST uses, like, you can do some things in CMC and some things in CMP. Like, it's a sort of a mixed bag, as I recall. I'm asking because I'm debating on agreeing to review the draft. And I don't know much about CMP. So if it's all CMP stuff, I'm not going to volunteer because I don't really know anything about CMP.
I'd need to go back and read the ESG draft in detail again to answer that question, Deb.
Right, but your draft is not. So my question is whether your draft is like CMP-ish, or whether I can read the draft not knowing much about CMP.
You can read the draft without knowing much about CMP.
Okay, so I can read the draft. It looks like it's short. It's like it's 17 pages long. It sounds like. It's
short, and there's quite a few figures in there.
Oh, good. Pictures are better. So I can review if you would like.
Great, thank you. And it does not go into too many details in CMP or CMC.
Okay, so if no one else is in the queue, Owen, do you think that this is ready for working group last call? We'll get the reviewers there.
I think so, yeah. Once we get the reviewers, yeah, I think we're good to go with it. I know Michael agrees with that anyways.
So obvious question, anybody opposed to going to working group last call? Good, I like this silence. Okay, so we'll start 2 working group last calls next week. Okay, so I think, Owen, you're also doing the last thing, the subdomain. Yeah. So, Rich, can you put on those slides? Oh, there they are.
Okay. So, go on to the next slide, please. So, Acme allows a server to issue certs for a given identifier without requiring a challenge to be explicitly fulfilled against that identifier. Like, for example, an Acme cert can issue a cert for food.bar.example.com, where the client has only fulfilled a challenge against one of the parent authorized domain names, bar.example.com or example.com. And a server could issue certs for a number of subdomain certs that only require a single challenge to be filled against the parent domain. And that's really nice when you want to scale to use Acme to issue certs automatically for a large number of end entity certs for devices in your internet cases. We do an authorization once for a top level domain or a parent domain, and then we could use Acme to automatically issue certs for hundreds or thousands of end entity devices. Next slide. So changes, we've incorporated the submitter feedback immediately after 109. We've incorporated. One of the strong pieces of feedback was to restrict the challenge type to DNS01 specifically for the subdomain use case. So what that means is that a DNS01 challenge must be fulfilled against a parent authorized domain name in order to issue certs for a subdomain identifier. We've also included text in the latest draft to address the 2 open items that were raised on the mailer and discussed briefly at the last IETF 109. Next slide. So this is the first of the open items, and the open item was, does the client need a mechanism to indicate to the server that they're willing and capable of fulfilling challenges against parent domains? So for example, for the food.bar.example.com identifier, should the client be able to explicitly tell the server that it actually has like the DNS keys or whatever it needs to fulfill a challenge against bar.example.com or example.com? And one of the things that was raised on the mailer during discussions was that we want to avoid the scenario where a server could issue a challenge against a parent identifier that the client is not authorized to fulfill a challenge against. For example, client issues an order for food at bar.example.com, server issues a challenge for example.com, but the client doesn't have the DNS keys for publishing text records to fill that challenge against the parent domain. We want to avoid that scenario. So what I proposed, and this hasn't been reviewed in detail yet, so this is what I proposed is, and this is based on inferring some comments that Ryan and Philippe and a few people have made on the mailers as well, is we could include an optional Boolean flag associated with an identifier in a new order, new WhatsApp request, and that optional flag indicates whether the client has control over all parent ADNs or not. Because I believe typically for CAs, they'll base their logic off the top level domain example.com, not off things like bar.example.com. So if this flag is true, then the server may issue, if the client includes this flag and the flag is true, then the server knows it can issue a challenge against any of the parent ADNs, and the client will be capable of fulfilling a challenge against them. If the client sets this flag as false, then the client is telling the server, I can't fulfill a challenge against any parent domain. The only thing I'm authorized to fulfill a challenge against is the explicit FQDN that I'm requesting. So that's the only thing I want to challenge for. Well, this slide looks a little small there, apologies, but I just cut and pasted some text from the draft, which shows what the parent domain authorization looks like. It's just an extra Boolean flag that is optionally associated with the identifier. And I think, well, we should actually debate what the logic should be if that isn't included. And I think if the flag isn't included, it should default to true, probably, because that's the behavior that baseline Acme has. Baseline Acme doesn't make any assumptions about this at all, so it's left entirely up to server policy. So I have one follow-on question for this proposal. If you go on to the next slide. So next slide, please. And the question I have, is that sufficiently granular? Like, is there any need for a client to be able to specify a subset of parent ADNs it has control over? For example, if the client wants to search for food.bar.example.org, and it can control bar.example.org, but not the top level domain. Do we need that level of flexibility? And I don't think we do, but I'd like to discuss that. And what I've documented in draft 4 is that we don't need that level of flexibility, and just a simple Boolean flag is sufficient. So what's shown on the right-hand side Again, the rendering isn't that big on this page, but it shows underneath the identifier is an array of ADNs that the client is actually authorized to fulfill a challenge against. Yeah, that's better. So you scroll over a little bit. Yeah, you can see that the client has issued an order for the food@bar.example.org identifier, and I've just included illustratively, the client could also optionally include a list of ADNs saying, well, I can fulfill a challenge against food@bar.example.org. I can fulfill a challenge against bar.example.org, but I'm not authorized to fulfill a challenge against example.org. Now, I don't think we need that flexibility, but I'm just asking a question here. Okay, and next on to the next slide, we can go on to open item number 2. And this is just from the server side. Does the server need a mechanism to provide a choice of identifiers to the client and let the client choose which challenge to fulfill? And there was some discussion on this on the mailer as well. We believe that this is not needed and that this would make the server state machine and tracking far too complicated. And it's sufficient for the client to be able to signal to the server whether it's capable of fulfilling challenges against parent ADNs or not. So the proposal is there's no provision to do this in the draft, and I've added clarifying statements in the draft that if the client indicates that the parent domain authorization is true, then server policy controls which identifier that the server can use to issue a challenge against. But all the client is indicating with this flag is that it's up to you now, server. I've told you I can authorize against or fulfill challenges against all of the domains. You decide which one you want to issue a challenge against, and that aligns with the baseline Acme spec as well. Next slide, please. I think they're the only 2 open items. Yeah, they're the 2 only open items. The draft has just been published with those 2 open items closed and documented. So I'd like to get some feedback on those 2 proposals for the open items, and it is based on what was discussed in the mailers a couple of months back. And then we'd look for a final review of draft 04 with any feedback. And I know, Ross, you reviewed version 2, I believe, and we've incorporated all that feedback already.
Yeah, Russ,
Okay, that's it.
you're in the queue.
So I'm thinking the single bit is not granular enough because in different parts of the DNS tree, you don't know exactly where to stop. So in your example, foo.bar.example.org, you're pretty sure that you can't put the challenge in .org. But, you know, in other parts, where especially in CC-TLDs, it's not exactly clear where the top of a particular registrant's control begins. So I think your hey, I can deal with challenges in any of these places is safest.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Rich. As an individual, I think we should adopt this. As a chair, I think we should, you know, send this over to DNSOP and get their feedback once we've adopted.
Mm-hmm. So the obvious question is how many people have read it and perfectly willing to do the show of hands. Oh, let's try it. Right. Please don't raise your hand if you are an author. Okay, this seems to be converging on about 2 people having read it and 6 people having explicitly not read it. Okay, another one. So yeah, we can do an adoption call. I'd rather not do it, well, immediately now, but after we've done the other working group last calls, not to burden people with too many things at the same time. But yeah, I think we can do the adoption call, and then, yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so I guess the next step is the adoption call, which means we're almost done with the agenda and we're got to the open mic part. Going once, going twice. Okay, so you're getting back a lot of your time, and I just want to thank Rich for all the years of being a chair of Acme. Feel free
been
to open
fun,
your mic and
and-
say, thank you, Rich.
Yeah. Stop sharing.
I guess I don't know how to flip my. Yeah, I was going to say thanks, Rich. I don't know how to flip my camera. Everyone's looking at my monitor. For those that might be interested in being a co-chair, please do drop me a note to me and Ben, and we can sort that out. Additionally, what would be helpful for the working group is if we chartered a little more specificity into what the future work is. For example, we have some drafts we're talking about. We have some drafts adopted. We don't have necessarily milestones. I see that there's some drafts that are related and we don't even have on the agenda to talk about. So if we just had some dates for when we think we're going to be done, and we have some notion of when we will be done and what classes of extensions we want to cover. So it's basically a matter of, do we just need to finish what we have, or is there new scope that we expect to be talking about in the working group? Now's a good time to throw that out. Metaphorically on the mailing list, not necessarily at this meeting.
Right. Okay, thank you. Anything else for open mic?
Yeah, Rich needs to feed his dinosaur more often. It's really lost weight.
They taste like chicken.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you all, and you're getting back full 20 minutes of your life back. Bye.
Have a good week, everyone.
That's